All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to tonight's virtual program, Suicide Prevention and Awareness, presented by Adam White. My name is Beth Leckie, and I'm the Community Programming Librarian here at Mid-Continent Public Libraries. And so we're happy everyone could join us this evening. I did also want to share some information on some upcoming programs that we'll be having that might be of interest to folks. The first one is for teens. It's Mental Wellness is a Muscle, and it's being presented by Tri-County Mental Health. They'll be talking about the impact of stress on the body, understanding their own emotions and ways that they can use self-care and other coping strategies to improve their mental well-being. If you're interested, you can scan the QR code here on the screen, and that will take you to the registration page. And that one is in person. It's being held at our Parkville branch. In June, we have outdoor writer Brett Frazee and his daughter, who is a licensed counselor, Becky Franklin, who will be talking about the healing powers of the outdoors. That one is on Zoom, so you do need to register to receive the Zoom link. It's on Wednesday, June 8th at 7 p.m. And again, if you scan the QR code, it'll take you right to the registration page for that. But they'll be discussing ways that outdoor activities can help improve mental health. And Adam will be back with us on Wednesday, June 9th at 7 p.m. He'll be doing a program on managing stress and anxiety with mindfulness. So you can learn how to identify the signs of stress and anxiety and how to use mindfulness to help you cope. That one will also be right here on Zoom as well. And then the final program that I wanted to mention is that we have a variety of branch locations throughout the system that will be hosting in May and June our Introduction to Zen Meditation Program. If you scan the QR code on the screen, it will take you to our calendar of events where you can see the various locations and times and dates that it is being offered. But Daniel Sharpenberg will be teaching you Zen meditation techniques to help you calm your thoughts. Couple of other housekeeping items here real quick before we get started. If you have questions during the program, down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see where it says reactions and there's a little smiley face. When you click on that, it will give you an option to raise your hand. So if you can just raise your hand and then Adam will take your questions and answer. So feel free to ask at any time throughout the presentation. And with that, I want to introduce our presenter this evening. Adam is a provisionally licensed professional counselor who likes helping people overcome trauma and addictions. He uses a clear mindfulness-based approach to help people connect with their own experience and communicate it clearly to the people that are important to them. So with that, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Adam.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Let me get my screen shared here. So yes, I am Adam, again, PLPC in Missouri. Supervisor is Rochelle Pruitt. I am located in Lee Summit. That's where my office is and where I practice, though I do telehealth practicing with anyone in the state of Missouri. Tonight I'm presenting on suicide prevention and ideas to it. And at least in my experience, I'm going to take a little bit of different approach than I've seen a lot of people do this. And I'm going to talk about like a theory of suicide. This theory of suicide was created by Thomas Joyner in 2005, and he calls it the interpersonal theory of suicide. And the reason why I'm kind of taking this approach is because, like, what Thomas Joyner is trying to do here is explain, why does this happen? And if we can understand better why it happens, we can do a better job of preventing it from happening. So I'm going to cover his theory today. I'm going to talk about things that we can do to help. And then at the very end, just kind of like some generic resources that everyone can use. The two images here are two of his books talking about his theory. So, like, if you're interested in learning more about this, these are the two books that he has published about this, and you can look on that on your own time. So, the interpersonal theory of suicide, it kind of focuses on death by suicide and a little bit less as on suicide attempts. This is a key point of this theory, and I'll explain why that's important in the next slide. But some of the stats that kind of come out is, like, there are 25 attempts per death that happens around this, and then, like, other breakdowns for different groups. So it's like for young adults, for youth, it's 100 to 200 attempts per death. But when we get to older adults, it's 4 attempts per death. And so this is kind of why the theory focuses on deaths versus attempts, is because these statistics kind of reveal something very interesting about what is happening here. And so having so many attempts before a death happens is very important information. And again, next slide, I'm going to get into it. And so this theory is kind of focusing on it, and that it's trying to prevent the death first and foremost. And by means of that, we want to prevent attempts, but kind of focusing on this death piece of it. And it states that a death happens when someone has the desire and the capability. And this is something that no other theory has really gotten into. This is a unique part of Thomas Joyner's theory, is that it's the blend of the desire to die and the capability. And he explains that capability is something that's actually very difficult, and it's something that's acquired. So the basic idea of the theory is that it's got 3 pieces to it. It's built of thwarted belongingness, perceived burdensomeness, and then the physical capability. These 2 big circles, the thwarted belongingness and perceived burdensomeness, those are what contribute to the desire to die. The capability is about the physical ability. It's about a numbing of the fear of death in a way. More explanations on this later as well, but the capability is something very different from the desire. Most of what we're going to be able to work with is on the desire side, but the capability side is going to be some interesting things for us to think about. But here's the core piece of his theory. Like, this is how you can get it in kind of a simple image, is that with these 3 pieces is how a death actually happens. If you have, and it's the attempts happen when you only have like 2 of the 3 or something like that. So that's a core piece. And so acquired capability is about these 2 pieces. It's about the loss of fear of pain or death, or a tolerance to pain. And so people acquire the ability to die by suicide through these 2 means, and different life activities can contribute to this. So, and this is where I can start to pull in like that stat of, like, in older adults, it's 4 attempts per death, whereas in youth, it's 100 attempts per death. Older adults have acquired a higher tolerance of pain. They've acquired less fear of pain. And so this is like part of why they're more capable in this realm. Other things that contribute to this is exposure to a lot of pain and death. And so if we're talking about people who have come back from a war zone, they have a lot of experience with pain and death. They've learned how to tolerate pain. They've learned how to tolerate fear. And this makes them far more capable of inflicting that upon themselves. And so this is a thing for us to look out for. If we have people who are starting to lose this fear, able to tolerate pain, we can start considering them as higher risk than we might someone else. So if someone doesn't have fear and doesn't have that tolerance to pain, we would consider them as lower risk. And like that stat I presented a couple slides ago, for youth, it's 100 attempts. And so it's, this is how his theory is starting to make sense of those kind of statistics. And then habituation is another way that this can start to happen. And so previous attempts start to lower this fear of pain. They start to increase the tolerance of pain. So we always think that previous attempts increase risk. So we don't want to think about that way. And then witnessing pain in violence, not just experiencing it, but witnessing it. So people who come from a very violent or abusive background could be considered higher risk. And I'm talking about the capability aspect right now, and the capability is definitely the hardest one for us to control, but I think it's an interesting piece for us to consider, that how this is playing in how suicide happens and then what we can do to prevent. I'll get more into prevention steps in a little bit, but just kind of wanting to explore how this theory works. And so this is the acquired capability. We acquire the capability to harm ourselves through exposure and practice in a way. And as we learn to tolerate pain, as we become desensitized to the fear of pain, we become a higher risk. So this is just one of those three circles. The next one. Thwarted belongingness was another theme that he pulled out. This one can be real or imagined. So we're talking about like people have psychological needs. Belongingness is a psychological need, and maybe that is directly thwarted in reality, or maybe it's just a perception. Maybe how I interpret the situation is making me believe that my belongingness has been thwarted. This is kind of captured in kind of an idea of like, I don't belong anywhere or with anyone, that I don't belong kind of mentality. And then like another idea that I want to tie in here comes from John Gottman, who's a big couples therapist. But he talks about this idea of like missed bids for connection. And I really like that phrase, bids for connection, because all of us in relationship we do something to try to get someone's attention, and recognizing that as a bid for connection. So like in a very passive way, maybe I walk into a room and I give this really big heavy sigh or something just very loudly. That's me making a bid for connection. And if no one responds to it, that bid for connection is missed. And that can turn into me feeling like I don't belong here, and that kind of stuff. There's a lot of like detail that can go behind that, but I just like want to include this idea that people, as part of trying to meet our psychological needs, we're going out there and we are putting bids for connection out there, and then whether they're intentionally ignored or missed, that need's not getting met, that connection isn't happening, and therefore we feel like we don't belong, and our belongingness is thwarted. And so And this is a big contributor to why people might think they want to die by suicide, is that they don't belong. They're not here. And then like at the bottom of the slide is kind of like things we can do to counter it. And so it's like belonging, creating positive, like we create belonging for people. Positive interactions, frequent interactions, and close interactions, things that make people like one-on-one. So like maybe group settings aren't always the best idea, even though the next one is group-based activities, but like close belongingness like has a level of intimacy to it, and a level of like, I see you, I understand you, I'm receiving you. And it can, if we can, tie it to the bids of connections, like I noticed you asking to be connected with, and now I'm connecting with you. So a way that we can start working to kind of address this thwarted belongingness is start looking for that. Group-based activities is another thing to do. Sports and concerts are suggestions for this. Concerts just is more passive, but like sports is you're part of a team. And this is specifically kind of like team sports. So if you belong to a team, it's a lot easier to counter this belief, like I don't belong anywhere or with anyone. Well, I belong on a team. And so group-based activities can be a good suggestion to kind of push back against this thwarted belongingness, because if you're part of a group activity, you're doing something and you're just naturally a part of something. An interesting piece that comes out of his theory that he talks about is like disasters and shared struggles can be a really strong protection. And I don't have the specific things that he talked about in some of his books, but it was things like hurricanes or bigger disasters. And I saw him on a talk, and he was even referencing COVID, and he was like, suicide deaths went down during COVID because it was a shared struggle. And so even those things, we don't want to create disasters, but it's just trying to pull out this idea that if the people who are at risk here with this thwarted belongingness, if we can invite them into the struggle so that they are struggling along with us, so it's like I am struggling and you are struggling, that can create a sense of belonging and a sense of connection. And then we're going to have a tie into this in the next slide as well, but it can also, like, if they're contributing in the struggle, that can help too. I'll get more into that in the next slide. But yeah, just kind of iterating, like, it might be like a natural inclination that if a big major disaster happens, people will feel more depressed, but it seems to be a little bit backwards from that. And that when people struggling with suicide can see how their struggles are being shared by more people than just them, they have a greater sense of belongingness, and that makes them less of a risk. And so just something to think of, and like how sharing our struggles with each other can be a way to try to prevent people dying by suicide through this means. And then that final circle that was there was perceived burdensomeness. This comes up, a lot of people who struggle with suicide have this thought that they are a burden upon everyone around them. It comes in many ways. If they're struggling with depression, it can just be like, I just bring everyone down. So why should I interact with anyone? I'm just going to bring them down because I'm so depressed. Or it can be even a little bit more like a physical thing. Like sometimes people with disabilities or people who are older, tying into that statistic again, can feel like a burden to their family. Like, I'm not able to take care of myself. I require help with everything that I do, whether it, like, I need someone to help me bathe. I need someone to help me clean up after the bathroom. Someone has to cook all of my meals and feed me. These kinds of ideas make that person feel like a burden. this feeling, it's a perception. It could be real, it could be false. It depends on the person and their situation, but it is this feeling that I am a burden, and then coupled with it is that everyone else is going to be better off if I just am not here anymore. Like kind of that next bullet point. They have this thought that if they die, people will be relieved of the burden that they're placing on them, and that will make everything better. And again, so it could be real, it could be just a perception. I like to be cautious around this idea a little bit, as I think it's a natural human tendency when someone starts saying these things like, oh, I'm such a burden, I'm such a burden. Our natural human tendency is to tell them, no, they aren't. And I like to be cautious around that because I want to respect the truth and respect honesty. So especially like if an example of someone who is just unable to care for themselves and needing a lot of assistance just to do normal daily functioning, they can see everyone around them working very hard to take care of them. And I think it is the truth to say that there is a burden there. So when someone is feeling like they are a burden, I don't want to go out and just deny what they feel is going on. And so like, if they do require that assistance, to just acknowledge that that's there. Like, okay, but we can do something else with it than just like let it be, because we do want to create a change, but I don't want to like just oppose and deny, because again, they're watching, they know. And in the case of like people who are caring for older parents, like that can be very, very hard, and they will notice that people are struggling to do it, to deal with this situation. Like, we don't want to pretend that life isn't how it is. So it's yeah. So the counter to perceived burdensomeness is a little bit different than just saying like, oh, you're not a burden, but we can do something else with it. I think it's on, yeah, it's right here. I'll just continue with the burdensomeness. So I'm jumping into the middle of the slide. Like what we can do, besides just telling them, oh, you're not a burden, what we can do is help them increase their sense of contribution. So maybe if we have to bathe them every night, yeah, that is a struggle and a burden of some kind, but we're willing to do it because you're contributing to our life in some way. And so if we can increase their sense of contribution, that is how we can kind of combat this perceived burdensomeness. Back to the top, the thwarted belongingness, we talked about it, but like the shared struggle idea, or like, I'm with you. So in quotes, it's like, I'm with you. I am going to be in the struggle with you. It's not that you're struggling and I'm not struggling. It's that I'm struggling too, and we're going to struggle together. And then what we can do, increase that belongingness, look for those bits of connection, and just like try to recognize, like, I see you reaching out, let me meet you. And so like, that's how we can increase belongingness. And then finally, with the acquired capability, this one is the hardest to change, and there's very little we can actually do it. Once someone has acquired the capability, once they've developed a high pain tolerance and they've lost the fear of pain or lost the fear of death, there's not a lot we can do to change that back. But what we can do is prevent access, block impulsivity, and break habituation. And preventing access is probably the easiest one to get into. And so if we have someone who's struggling with suicide, some of the first things that we do is we just start removing the means. Are there weapons in the house? We get them out of the house and somewhere else. Are there medications that they could do? We get them out. On broader societal levels, people are talking about putting fencing and nets on bridges and things like that. And so just preventing access is one of the things you can do that slows it down. This also helps block impulsivity, like putting on the societal level, like putting fences up around bridges and that kind of thing. Yes, a person can climb the fence, but climbing the fence takes more effort, and impulsivity won't survive the effort as much. And so if we can put barriers in the way, we kind of slow down the initial responses and give them more time to think about what's going on. And being able to block that is successful in keeping people alive and giving them a chance to figure out what's really going on. And then blocking the habituation. Again, back to the original stats, like 25 attempts per death. Attempts at suicide increase the risk of being successful at it. And so being able to stop those kinds of habits, if we can, is helpful. And it goes in the line of preventing that tolerance of pain as well. As like, if we can stop it from happening. This can also get into other issues as well. And so like habits of cutting and self-harm are part of that habituation. And so if we can find ways to prevent that, we lower the risk of a suicide happening. And then even access to violence itself is part of that habituation. And so if we can start curbing just how much violence is happening around this person, we can start curbing their tolerance of pain. And so again, acquired capability is a very hard thing to change. There's some stuff we can do that is useful, but our biggest areas of impact are going to be around thwarted belongingness and perceived burdensomeness, which are about the desire to die itself. And if we can get into these things, help people see that they're contributing to society and their relationships, help people see that they're not alone and that people are struggling with them. These are the biggest places that we can work on it. And then as a final conclusion to that, before we can get into discussion and questions, we have the Suicide Prevention Lifeline website there. There's their phone number. And then we have a new number, which I believe this is pretty new. It's the 988. It works like 911. You just type it, dial that in, and it connects you with the nearest local suicide hotline for your area. Again, that's new, and I think it'd be a good idea to spread that information around. 988 is a very simple way to get in contact. And the importance of this is just like, if you yourself or someone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide, with depression, something like that, you can call this number, whether it's they can call out on their own and get support for themselves, or you can call and say, and talk to someone and say, hey, I have someone here I'm worried about, and they can help you figure out what to do. This little image is just kind of like what happens when you call it. And so, yeah, they'll explain it. You'll hear an automated message that will give you some options. And then they will connect you to a crisis worker who will talk through what you need to get talked through. And then they'll connect you to further support if that's what you need. So that's just kind of like the brief rundown of the theory.
I want to thank Adam for a very informative presentation on a difficult topic, and thanks to everyone who joined us this evening as well. And we hope you'll join us for future programs. Adam, as I said earlier, will be back next month on June 9th to do his program on managing stress and anxiety. Have a great evening, everybody.